My name is John Prager. I am Vice President of Operations at our winery. Our winery started in 1979. It's a dream of my father's, Jim Prager. We originally moved from Southern California. At that time, growing up, my dad had a love affair with wine, and we actually dug him a wine cellar, my brothers and I. And during those years, the early 70s, he came up with friends, and because they were taking this wine appreciation class, and they just fell in love with the Napa Valley. They stopped at Schramsberg. Before that, they stopped at Oakville Grocers and got some caviar, and then they got to Schramsberg and they just had the violin and the grand piano out in the vineyard, and they just fell in love with the area. And my dad turned to my mom and said, "I would like to retire here." And so that was probably about 1975 and 76. My dad was actively looking for a place to move to, and he found this place as our home and winery. And in 77 we moved up here. He pulled the trigger and moved me and 6 other siblings from Southern California up here with chickens and other things, and we started the business in 79. He got this aha moment when he was visiting UC Davis. He was taking some crash courses there, and one of the professors had taken him to the winery, where the students made wine, but they couldn't take it off the premises. So he went down to the cellar and he pulled out a bottle of Cabernet Port that the professor had made. And that's when my dad had that aha moment. That was back in 78 or so. Anyway, so he fell in love with this style of port, and here we are this day. That was our specialty of the house. And nobody has ever made a port as seriously like we have. Even since the beginning of Napa Valley, to the best of our knowledge, nobody's ever made I should say, specialized in port. My dad loved port. Actually, growing up, he collected port. Literally, you would find a port, and he would literally buy 5 cases at a time, because he knew this stuff was going to age for 25, 30, 50 years, and he loved tracking the wine over the years, and that's what he wanted to do. He didn't care much for the domestic ports that were made at the time. So 40 years ago, they weren't made very well. They were almost made as an afterthought. And but Dad started out making drier styles of port, starting low-end sugar ports, and then eventually kind of titrated upwards, but still below the most ports sugar level. So our port's a little drier than most ports. We've always touted that. Well, for the most part, we use Petite Sirah, but in 1999 we purchased some property up in Calistoga, and now we use some of the Portuguese varietals. We use a Tinto Roriz, which most people know as Tempranillo, and we also use Tinta Cow, and then the best, what's well known, is Touriga Nacional. And then, of course, the other varietals we've used is Cabernet and Merlot. Not much of that, but mostly Petite Sirah. And so our white ports we make mostly from Chardonnay, and a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc for our drier ports. So actually, some of it is actually blended with the Verdelho, which is a Portuguese varietal that we planted up at that ranch we had in Calistoga, and that's basically it. Yeah, so the Riesling, we started that program in in 89, but that was a Chardonnay. But the Riesling, we started that program in 97, and it's been pretty popular. So we get that fruit outside the Napa Valley. It's the only fruit that we get outside the Napa Valley.
And where does that come from?
From Lake County, from Kelseyville. Yeah. Sure. I'm going to start off with the Aria White Port. Aria is actually dedicated to one of my dad's, of course, a grandchild. She's the oldest of all the grandchildren. That was the idea, of making a wine starting with the oldest grandchildren of 7 families. That was a mistake. But Aria is a Chardonnay-based white port. And white port, typically in Portugal, is something you pour before dinner rather than an after dinner, as most people associate port with. They don't associate port with food, but this does well in lieu of a sherry, with hors d'oeuvres and first course, and certainly with desserts. It's 100% Chardonnay. It ages for 3.5 years in barrel, and it's the lighter of the traditional ports that we make. So it's not syrupy. And of course, none of our ports are syrupy, but it's not as heavy as the other ones are. We produce about 400 cases of this stuff a year. It's become very popular. The next one would be the Nobel Companion. And Nobel Companion is our 10-year-old Tawny Port. We started this program back in 1985, and because it takes 10 years to make. But this is actually a blend of 3 of the Portuguese varietals, some Cab and Zin, Cab, Merlot, and Petit Syrah. But this particular one is actually a blend of 4 different vintages, and the youngest, because of compliance, is 10.5 years in barrel. Tawny Ports get their name by the color of the wine, which it's caramelized, it's nutty, it's brown, it's amber, brickish in color. It's actually Tawny means brown or amber. It's caramelized, it's nutty, it's got that dried fig, date, toffee flavors. It's typically, Tawnies are a little sweeter than the other ports other than Ruby. Rubies are the sweetest, but it's the most popular style, most recognizable style in the world. So we had to make one. Okay. The next is we consider our vintage style, something you would lay down and age for 25, 30 years if you have the time and the wherewithal. But people like it young and youthful, like this is. This is made from 100% Petit Syrah. It's called our Royal Escort. And we started using Petit Syrah in 1981. So usually people made port at that time with Zin or Cabernet was the basic varietal. I think best of my knowledge, we're the first to use Petit Syrah. It makes the best, stylistically, a better California port than Zinfandel Cabernet. It's very dark, it's inky, it ages well, and holds up very well for long term. An old English tradition is the uncle would buy a vintage port when a child was born, the year the child was born, so when he or she was married, it was ready to drink. So we had to have one of these too. Well, it's very dark and inky. If made well, it has also a little bit of tannic structure early on, because the skins of the grape is thicker than they say the Syrah grape. But even the flavor profiles might be different from traditional port from Portugal, but it has similar flavors too. But it's just dark and inky as a very young port, and it's easy to work with when making it. And the last one is the Sweet Claire. It's a late harvest Riesling dedicated to another grandchild. Her name is obviously Claire, but it's 100% Riesling. It's kind of stylistically, the sweetness is like an Auslese, so it's not really sweet, but I would say not syrupy sweet, but juicy sweet. Quite refreshing, easy to drink. This is like breakfast wine for a lot of people. It's low alcohol. It's only 10%, but again, it's really refreshing, real juicy, refreshing. Yeah. How port starts, we crush the grape just like any other wine. Add yeast, get the fermentation going. And about halfway through the fermentation, we introduce 169 proof grape spirit, which kicks the alcohol up to 18%, which is beyond the tolerance of the yeast and yeast dye, and what's left is some of the unfermented grape sugar in the beginnings of port. And how long they age in barrel is what sets the style from 2 to 10 or more years in barrel. So most ports have to spend a minimum of 2 years in barrel, and those are your vintage ports, like the Royal Escort. Tawny ports have to spend a minimum of 6 years in barrel, and white ports spend 3 to 5 years in barrel. Ports that actually get their name by the color of the wine, the tawny, whites, and we don't make is ruby. They've done all their aging, maturing in the barrels. So once they're bottled, they're ready to drink. They don't benefit really with bottle age. But the only thing is we'll improve with is the vintage style ports. So I guess the common question is, how did it all start? And my dad was out here in the early 80s going through a bunch of junk mail, and he came across a survey. There was a payment time to do the survey. It was a crisp $1 bill attached to it. He wasn't remotely interested in doing it, so at the end of the night, he actually threw the survey away, but he took the dollar bill with the thumbtack and stuck it up on the wall, and it sat there for years. People would come in the tasting room and look at that bill and say, "Is that the first dollar you earned?" He goes, jokingly says, "No, it's the first dollar I didn't earn." But in 1988, a guy came in and bought a bottle of port and got $1 and change back, and he complained that that's all I get is $1 for my purchase. What am I going to do with $1? My dad said, "Why don't you just stick it up next to mine?" And 32 years later, we have wallpaper. We make other things, other ports, other styles of ports that we only sell at the winery. We have another tawny port like this, but it's a vintage dated tawny, which they call a cojeta, and that aged for 12 years in barrel. And then we also have another white port, instead of 3.5 years in barrel, it's 10.5 years in barrel, called the blonde tawny. So they're quite different and very unique. So we're still playing around with different styles of ports, and that's our motto here. Ports are our thing.